Quietly Brave HQ. Research-based audio overviews, powered by Pratiq. So today we're looking at a choice that so many young people face. It's this really critical, high-stakes decision between silence and voice. And we're not just talking about shyness here. We're talking about those crisis points, the moments where you have to make a serious calculation about whether to speak up or stay quiet.
And the stakes, I mean, they couldn't be higher. The situations where this choice really matters involve some incredibly serious issues. Things like ongoing bullying at school, abuse happening at home, online harassment, discrimination, or even being stuck in a really toxic relationship.
To really get a handle on this, let's start with maybe the most extreme example, an example that just anchors this whole conversation in the reality of risk. I'm thinking about Malala Yousafzai. When she was just a teenager, she was speaking out for a girl's right to an education, directly challenging the Taliban.
Yeah, and that choice to use her voice it was an act of radical courage, and it came with this immediate life-threatening risk. She got death threats, and of course, she was shot. It's a terrifying truth, isn't it, that speaking up is always a risk when the system is actively oppressive.
Exactly. And, while Malala's story is so important for context, most situations aren't these huge global crises. For most young people, the struggle is much closer to home. We're talking about a teacher who ignores bullying, or an abusive parent, a coach making inappropriate comments.
Or an employer who's exploiting them, who's relying on their fear to keep them quiet. And that silence in those everyday situations, it carries these profound consequences for mental health. There's this one devastating data point. Teenagers who stayed silent about being bullied. They were found to be 3 times more likely to develop depression and anxiety.
3 times. That's a staggering toll. So why is that? Why is the silent suffering so much more damaging?
Well, it's because when you can't speak the truth about what's hurting you, that pain, it doesn't just go away, it gets internalized. That silence teaches you subconsciously that maybe the injustice wasn't real, or even worse, that you deserved it. It leads to self-blame, self-doubt.
Okay, so if we understand that mental health toll, the next question has to be, is this silence affecting everyone equally? Or are some young people pushed into it more than others? Let's unpack this geography of silence.
Yeah, the risk is definitely not random. Systemic pressures mean that certain young people face, well, significantly higher hurdles to speaking out.
And we see this so clearly with LGBTQ youth, right? For many of them, just speaking their truth about who they are can put them in real danger.
Absolutely. When you look at the high rates of seriously considering suicide among LGBTQ youth, it's around 40%. A huge part of that is feeling like they can't speak their truth. Especially in, unaccepting families or communities. The environment forces the silence, and the silence creates the despair.
And that experience. It's similar for young women and girls dealing with harassment, but maybe driven more by a fear that the system will fail them.
Right. They fear they won't be believed. The classic he said, she said scenario.
Yeah.
They fear being blamed.
What were you wearing? Why were you there?
Exactly. And they fear that speaking up will just escalate it, make it worse. It's a rational choice, born out of a system that often fails them.
Then you have kids in abusive homes. The silence there is driven by, well, fear of retaliation from the abuser, but also fear of the system itself.
The fear of foster care or being separated from your siblings or even becoming homeless, it can make silence feel like the only way to hold your world together.
And that distrust of the system. It's mirrored by many students of color. They experience racism, from slurs to unfair discipline, but many choose to stay quiet.
Because they've learned, often the hard way, that speaking up makes adults defensive. Or worse, it gets them branded as a troublemaker.
And then there are young people growing up in poverty who just feel this intense pressure to keep their head down.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You can't risk rocking the boat when you absolutely need that paycheck or that small opportunity. So again, the silence isn't a lack of courage, it's an acute awareness of risk.
So if all these external pressures are just enormous, how do you actually move forward? Let's pivot to strategy. How does a young person build that muscle to move from silence to voice?
It really has to start with the start small principle. You can't go from total silence to leading a movement overnight. You have to build momentum. Look at Emma González, the Parkland survivor. She became this huge national figure, but she started small, talking with friends, speaking at a local vigil. Those small steps prepared her.
So the goal isn't to change the world in one go. It's just to break your own internal silence first. And that starts with finding just one person you trust.
That's it. A friend, a counselor, a decent teacher. The point of that first conversation isn't even to fix the problem. It's just to get the pain from the inside where it's corroding you to the outside.
And what if even saying the words out loud feels like too much? I know some suggest starting with writing.
Yes, writing is such a critical first step. Use a journal, a note on your phone. Just write down the experience, your feelings, your fears. Putting it into words makes it feel more real somehow, but also less overwhelming. It's a rehearsal before you ever have to say it to someone.
Which also ties into documentation. That feels so practical, but it's crucial if you're facing ongoing mistreatment.
It's evidence. It's not paranoia. Take screenshots of the harassment. Write down dates, times, specific words used. This documentation makes it much, much harder for anyone to dismiss your claim.
And while you're doing all this internal work, you also have to find your people.
Finding a community is just immense. Searching for support groups, online or in person, for abuse survivors, for LGBTQ youth, whatever you're facing. That realization that I'm not alone and I'm not crazy, that's often the biggest shift you need to find your voice.
Let's go back to that idea of courage. It's not some gift you're born with, is it? It's more like a muscle. It needs exercise.
Absolutely. You build up the capacity for those high-stakes moments by practicing in low-stakes ones. Disagree with something in class respectfully. Call out someone who cuts in line. Those small moments train your brain to tolerate the discomfort of conflict.
And this brings us to a really profound idea, separating your worth from the outcome. Can you talk about that a little more?
This is one of the most important takeaways. You have to untangle your personal value from the result of your action. Let's say you report something to the principal and they do nothing. The outcome is a failure. But you still spoke your truth. You stood up for yourself. That act has inherent worth no matter what the system does.
Right, the success is internal, even if the external result is disappointing.
Exactly. Now, to make those external attempts more effective, there are some structured ways to use your voice. Let's talk about the do's.
Okay, so first, do stick to the facts. Don't say, they're always bullying me. Say, on Tuesday at 11:30, they pushed my books down the stairs.
Specificity is key. And do use I statements. The focus should be on your experience. I felt unsafe when this happened, not you're a terrible person.
Because that just makes them defensive.
Immediately. Also, do know your rights. Look up school policies on bullying. Look up basic labor laws. Citing the actual rules being broken changes the whole conversation.
And do go up the chain. Don't stop at the first no. Teacher, then counselor, then principal. You have to be persistent.
And so importantly, do practice self-care. Speaking up is exhausting. You have to sleep, eat, and give yourself time to recover. It's not optional.
Okay, now for the don'ts. What's the first one?
Don't wait for permission. Trust that feeling in your gut that tells you something is wrong. You don't need someone else to validate it before you start the conversation.
And don't attack personally. It's so tempting when you're angry, but you lose your credibility. Focus on the behavior.
Right, and don't expect universal support. This is a hard one. Be prepared for friends or even adults to side against you, or just stay silent out of fear.
And the most important, don't. If you're in immediate physical danger, don't speak up in that moment.
Survival first. Always. Get to safety, then use your voice to report what happened.
Yeah, finally.
Don't give up after one attempt. That first conversation that goes nowhere isn't the end. It just means you need a different strategy.
So here's where it gets really interesting. How does taking that risk, how does using your voice actually create positive change?
Well, often it happens when one person's experience becomes collective evidence. There was this case at a California high school. A group of students saw that LGBTQ harassment was just rampant.
And they didn't just complain about it.
No, they started documenting every single incident. They collected statements, dates, times, and presented that data directly to the school board. And that forced the school to act. They had to implement new anti-harassment training, new policies. The students' voices protected the next generation.
We see that on a bigger scale, too, with people like Jazz Jennings. From a young age, she used her voice to talk about being transgender. Her goal was awareness. It was dignity. And her willingness to share her story made so many other trans kids feel less alone.
And sometimes the impact is more subtle, but completely life-altering. There was a girl who finally told her counselor about her alcoholic father. The counselor couldn't fix her dad's addiction, but they connected her with Alateen. And that one conversation changed her whole experience of the situation. It gave her community.
So what about when you succeed? When you speak up and people actually start listening? That can be overwhelming in itself.
It can. That's why it's so important to have a clear ask. Know what outcome you want before you go public. Do you want a policy change, an apology, a specific action? Clarity helps you direct the support you get.
Now we have to talk about the hard truth. Because sometimes speaking up genuinely makes things worse in the short term.
That's the ultimate difficulty of this choice, isn't it? If you report abuse, your living situation might get worse before it gets better. If you challenge authority, you might face consequences. It's always a calculation. You have to weigh the short-term risk of speaking up against the long-term, unsustainable suffering of staying silent.
And we have to be clear. For the most serious issues, abuse, assault, suicidal thoughts, this isn't just about telling a friend. This requires adult intervention. Speaking up in these cases means telling someone who can provide immediate help. Resources like the National Suicide Lifeline or RAIN or the Trevor Project, they exist for that exact purpose.
This episode is an AI-assisted audio overview based on structured synthesis. So if we synthesize all of this, the core conflict is this. Silence feels safer in the moment. It's a protective instinct. But over time, it just corrodes your self-worth.
While voice is riskier in the moment, it invites conflict, and that can be terrifying. But over time, using your voice builds agency. It confirms that you matter.
It's you saying, my experience matters. I deserve dignity.
It's not about being perfect, is it?
Not at all. Using your voice is messy. You'll make mistakes. The point isn't perfection. The point is movement. It's moving toward being someone who refuses to accept their own silence when something isn't right.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this? It means understanding that there's a politics of silence. The world tells young people to be quiet all the time, don't rock the boat, listen to your elders, and those messages, they benefit the people in charge. So speaking up about injustice is fundamentally an act of resistance.
And when you do it, when you find and use your voice, you might inspire someone you'll never even meet. You help change a policy. You become the person you needed when you were scared and silent.
We started with Malala, so maybe we should end with her wisdom on this. She said, "We realize the importance of our voices only when we are silenced." Don't wait until you're silenced to use your voice. Start building that muscle today.
That is the most powerful takeaway you can have.
Thank you for listening to Quietly Brave HQ, research-based audio overviews powered by Pratiq. Until next time, Namaste.